So this PowerPoint kind of goes through an orientation to how things work in Tennessee with respect to program review. We'll cover a number of different topics. Please feel free to jump in and ask questions if you want to, or I guess for the sake of recording, we could save them to the end. You can go ahead. Okay. So a number of years ago, we created a shared vision for educator preparation in Tennessee, and this was a collaborative effort with our stakeholder groups. And we wanted the process for approving educator preparation providers to support both continuous improvement in addition to the accountability function that it serves of preparation programs in the work of developing teachers and leaders who are able to effectively educate students. So you can see a shift to outcomes as well here. This was in alignment with the CAEP standards, really. So in Tennessee, we have a separate state board of education that establishes rules and policies. We are then tasked with implementing those policies. And then this part of work, the program approval side of it, whether it's a CAEP managed review or a Tennessee managed review, leads to recommendations that go to the state board for approval action. And we have a number of different types of approval decisions that can be made based on the outcomes. And either the state board approves or denies approval of both the EPPs and the programs that those EPPs offer. So we do reviews at the provider level and the program level. This is just a map for context of all of the approved educator preparation providers in Tennessee, with the exception of a couple that we need to add to the map. We have our first district-based approved preparation program in Murfreesboro. That's Rutherford County Schools. And then we also have a small school in Memphis, Rose College, that is now approved. So the process in Tennessee, the provider applies to us first to become an EPP. We then respond within 90 days. It is an iterative process, so there's some back and forth before we then take it to the board. That review process in the beginning is based on the CAEP standards, so they haven't been able to implement, obviously, as well as a number of other standards we'll talk about here in a moment. The initial approval of an EPP now goes to the board. It did not previously. And then within 3 to 5 years, we host what is called a full approval review, which is very similar to what CAEP would do. So we're now reviewing the provider because they've been in existence for a few years, able to generate data, have assessment data that they can share as well. And that would then lead to another recommendation that goes to the board for full approval. And then every 7 years, we would host a comprehensive review of that EPP. So some slight differences between the two types of reviews. So on the right is the CAEP State Joint Review. So this is what Lipscomb falls under. About 60% of our EPPs in Tennessee go through this process. Interestingly, it's mostly our public institutions, and they do receive some extra dollars in the quality assurance funding formula for being accredited. About 40% of our EPPs go through a state-only managed review. The team's composition, so in a state-managed review, we have one single Tennessee-selected review team for the provider level review and the specialty area program reviews. Whereas with the CAEP State Joint Review, obviously there's a CAEP team assigned to the review of the EPP and a state team that's assigned to review the specialty area programs or the licensure programs. The processes for kind of the off-site and on-site, what happens kind of off-site prior to the visit, are fairly similar. So we have a system that we'll talk about in a moment where EPPs submit information and the team reviews all of that information against the standards and a set of rubrics that we have in our handbook, generates the formative feedback report, and reads the addendum prior to the on-site visit. So that is obviously very similar with the CAEP process. And then on-site, the team conducts interviews with stakeholders to corroborate that evidence. And we've really tried to shift to a place where the majority of the review that happens off-site really leads the teams to be in a place where they know exactly what they want to focus on during those interviews. And I've seen that with CAEP as well. So in the past, we've been in a situation where the state team is on site and they're doing a bulk of the work that probably should have happened off site. And then lastly, the team generates a final report regarding the outcomes for the standards and specialty area programs for state board approval. And this needs to be adjusted a little bit, but on the CAEP side, your process for that report is slightly different. At the exit interview, we actually go to the point of, for a state manager review, we go to the point of telling the EPP what our current recommendation is going to be. Whereas I know CAEP visits, first they have to go to the board. But we also do final reports for specialty area programs. So the state is involved in all of the reporting for the licensure programs. Roles and responsibilities. So
can we go back real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah, not a
problem. So let me go ahead and ask a question as it relates to CAEP standard. It's an initial standard 1.3. I believe it's the same for the advanced standard 1.3, because CAEP is looking at the approval of those programs in the FFR. What has been communicated? What do I include in the narrative that's consistent with what's been communicated with the EPP related to the approval of their programs?
Good question. I'm going to answer this, and I hope I'm not wrong, but I think the way, and if you have thoughts on this, feel free to jump in. The way I think it, because going into the review, all the programs are approved. But are you questioning how does it play out during that on-site and in the report as far as the status from the state for approval of licensure programs?
Correct.
So the two teams, one thing we didn't really talk too much about is the relationship between the state team that's reviewing specialty area programs and the CAEP team that's reviewing the EPP. Those two teams have historically worked really well together, such that the CAEP, whoever's doing standard 1 is in consistent communication with the state team that's reviewing licensure programs to determine if there are any issues there.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Have people listed it previously as a potential area for improvement? Because going into the site, we can't attest that the program, like 51% of the programs will be approved.
Right.
So do we put it as a potential area for improvement and then get rid of it during the on-site review?
No, I have never seen it done that way.
Okay. I just want to be, I want to do it consistent as possible for you guys.
I think the best way to do it, because folks are, where are we in this review?
They've generated their CAEP reports. They are actively working on their addendum. Isn't that right, David?
So I've gotten word back from, I didn't get word back from CAEP until closer to Christmas. So, and they've given me feedback to respond to this afternoon. So I'll be getting the feedback to the EPP later today.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And as far as the specialty area programs, so
they've submitted their specialty area program reports, and they're now under review.
Okay. So I guess what I was thinking is we could make sure that the CAEP team and the state team, or the state lead probably, have a conversation about the status of the specialty area programs prior to the on-site.
Okay. I mean, that's I can put that. I just want to make sure the wording is consistent when we're referring to the approval of their programs, that they'll be reviewed on-site through the joint review process.
Yeah, I think what I would say is the Tennessee team, selected team, is currently reviewing specialty area programs, and we'll communicate with CAEP team if issues arise, something to that effect.
Okay. I didn't know if people had previously put it as an AFI because it happens at the same time. Okay, that's
no.
Thank you. I'll appreciate it.
Yeah. So there will be 1 to 2 state facilitators. So you're likely talking to them right now. So it's usually me, Annie, Jack, and maybe 1 or 2 other people on our team split up reviews and serve as state facilitators. And that role in our minds is one to just make sure that the CAEP team has the Tennessee context for this work, and we'll talk a lot more about that here in a moment. And if any questions arise that are kind of Tennessee specific, we're there to respond to those. We also basically facilitate the progress that the state team is making, whether it's a state managed visit on the EPT review and staff review, or in the case of a CAEP joint review, the staff review. So it's kind of like we make sure things get done, and we're there to respond to any questions or concerns that may come up. There's then a state review team lead, and they have to be a trained CAEP reviewer from Tennessee. They are typically placed on the CAEP review team, and they're assigned 1 standard, though this spring is a bit of an anomaly for that. We did not assign our state team lead to any CAEP standards, and that's okay. There's nothing that says we absolutely have to, and it's just kind of a matter of timing and resources on our end. But that state team lead, who is that? Tasha, that's right. Tasha really will review or support the review team in the process of the specialty area program review.
They did get her added in Ames, so I put her with another individual for standard 4.
Oh, okay, great. So she will be working with someone else. That actually makes a lot of sense because of the specific contextual things regarding standard 4 in Tennessee.
Right.
Very good.
Yeah.
Then the state review team is generally made up of 3 to 4 trained reviewers appointed by us, and they're responsible for conducting an independent review of whatever specialty area programs they've been assigned. They participate in a consensus discussion. They generate a formative feedback report for the specialty area programs. They participate in interviews, and then they generate the final report. So they work right alongside the CAEP team on site. And every visit I've been on, that has worked really, really well. And sometimes the 2 teams are interacting. If there's a case where somebody is unable to make it to an interview, but they have a specific question that they want someone else to ask, they may hand that off to somebody on the CAEP team or vice versa. And that seems to work well.
I would add too that as you all are getting closer, as we're all getting closer to Lipscomb's on-site visit, it'll be helpful to continue to include Tasha in the conversations regarding the generation of the agenda and just overall logistics, so that she can continue to communicate with the state review team about, how will the state review team tag along to the interviews that are set up to corroborate and verify evidence. So we're happy to be copied on those major correspondences so we can help facilitate as well. But as long as Tasha's on there, I think that we'll all be in good shape as we approach the on-site visit.
Will there need to be interviews set up just for the state reviewers to ask programs specific questions, or?
Yeah, good question. In general, we've found, with one exception, that the state review team can pretty much tag along on already set up interviews, as long as, they're pretty typical in that we're interviewing faculty, clinical mentors, current candidates, alum, executive leadership at the EPP. So generally, we can find ways to tag along with those. One thing that we'll get into later in this webinar is that there is one on-site visit requirement, and that Tennessee has been very active in implementing high-quality literacy instruction across ed prep providers. And so there are some specific literacy interview questions that we want to ensure that there is some time for to ask faculty the current candidates and clinical educators, and we can send to you some of the literacy questions that we want to ensure that we have time to ask while reviewers are on site. So with the exception of literacy, we can pretty much tag along on the rest of the interviews and get the information that we need.
Okay. Another question popped into my mind and I've lost it. I know that the state team is not writing members of the CAEP joint team, at least as far as the CAEP standards are concerned. Are the state team generally involved in reviewing the CAEP team report, or is that not? Is it just, are we seeing this separate on that case?
Separate.
Okay. So only those who have been like trained CAEP reviewers and Tasha will review the standards as well as the narrative as it relates to the CAEP team's writing.
That's right. I think the collaboration is really the most intense during the on-site visit, just to ensure, like, as you all are talking through at, various stages during the on-site visit, that there's opportunity to, bring in the state team wherever it's relevant, especially, within the language that CAEP uses within and across programs. So if there's like a very specific question related to the programs that the team could help support, then we'll want to engage and collaborate as much as possible during the on-site visit to help, satisfy that evidence.
Okay.
Okay, so this will be kind of less important for you, but we did want to share information about a system that we built called TN Atlas that was funded through an IES grant. And it is essentially souped-up version of AIMS. It's our system for operationalizing the review process. So the state team will be deep in this system. They already have been. EPTs submit evidence in the system. Annual reports data can be accessed through the system, so that's where the TN Atlas system will connect with Standard 4 specifically, and some other areas, but it is a login-based system. So CAEP folks, the CAEP team members would not have access to this system, but state facilitators, EPPs, and the state review team will have access. And so if it does come up that the CAEP team is interested in understanding some of the outcomes and data that may be in that system, we can pull that for them as well. I don't know that I need to go into detail on that.
Okay. David, we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about the specialty area program report requirements. Did you have any other questions before we move forward?
No, I don't have any other questions.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to cover specialty area program reviews. So months before an on-site visit for a CAEP state joint review, the department hosts a webinar for the particular EPP, and what we do during that webinar is first we verify any of the approved and conditionally approved programs that will require the generation of a particular report, and then we verify that we have matching records from what they actually offer on there, and then we talk through each of the required components for every report that's required to satisfy the program approval portion of this comprehensive review. So that's sort of what our step one in the verification is, as we do that back and forth to really verify this is what we have as approved, this is what we understand that you're offering. Here in Tennessee, we look at programs at the endorsement level, the program level, so English 612, for example, at the undergraduate or the post-bac level, and then we also look at the clinical practice pathway. So that in the state of Tennessee, and we'll talk more about this in some detail later, would be student teaching, internship, or job embedded. So we do look all the way down to the clinical practice pathway to really understand the details about every particular approved program. Every report follows the same structure, and that we do cluster programs together. So for example, if Lipscomb, I can't remember off the top of my head, but let's say they offer a slew of world languages, world language programs such as Spanish, French, German, Latin, etc. Those would all be clustered under a single report, but then delineated within that report to talk about the differences between endorsements and pathways. So a single report will follow this structure here, and that there are 5 required components. The first one is sort of a high-level overview of a program synopsis, meaning we'll ask about, you know, what's the major, what is the program level and clinical practice pathway, what does the program sequence look like? And so at a glance, a reviewer could read it and sort of understand what is this program all about. Then also ask for programs of study, which would be programs of study with courses, clinical experiences, and any sorts of descriptions for the most current programs on record. And the third section is really the meatiest of all requirements, and that's the program alignment to standards and requirements. So in the state of Tennessee, we follow the INTAC standards, that's professional education standards. So all programs need to be aligned to the INTAC standards. Again, we talked about literacy being a big focus, the EPP literacy standards for particular programs, and there are policies that outline these particular literacy standards, and the state review team is well-versed in what the policy language is and what the requirements are. And that also includes the required program components, which are specific to each particular program. So you have to demonstrate through matrices program alignment to these standards and requirements. Part 4 is probably the newest area for us, and Part 4 is actually not factored into an approval recommendation at this time because we're essentially piloting it. But in the past, and even currently so, this program approval process as part of the comprehensive review has been very inputs driven. And we're trying to move away from that and to be a little bit more output focused. And so in Part 4, what we do ask is that for each program, the EPP develops a statement of confidence or a program impact statement of confidence that using EPP generated or annual reports data that show that their programs are actually having a difference on making a difference on student impact in the classroom. So they generate a 2 to 3 paragraph statement using data to show their program effectiveness. And then finally, if they have any SPA recognition, meaning that any programs are nationally recognized or accredited by an organization, then they would upload that documentation there. This, as Michael stated, that at any time during the on-site visit, if you want to pull up a particular program report, we have the ability in TN Atlas to zero in right on that particular report, pull it up, look at that program synopsis, look at the matrices to demonstrate alignment. So please know that you could call upon the state review team if there are particular questions, and we can disaggregate that program as well. Any questions on this before I move on? Sorry, any questions about this? I just unmuted you.
It's okay. No questions on that part.
Okay.
Wait, there was one.
Sure.
Because it came up in the FFR. The CAEP standards particularly outline the relationship between the college and career ready standards. What is Tennessee's process in terms of looking at those particular standards? Are they included in the specialty areas, or has Tennessee developed their own standards? Or because I want to make sure that the context is appropriate for that particular area.
Yeah, good question. So through our revised state managed process, we were a little more prescriptive on how Tennessee sort of defines the career, the college and career readiness standards. One area in particular is the EPP literacy standards. And when you do a deeper dive into the EPP literacy standards for candidates, essentially what it is the Tennessee academic student standards that mirror but are just put in the context of knowledge and pedagogy for the particular candidate. So I think that's one area of focus. Michael, are you thinking of RTI where another focus?
It might be worth sharing our rubric with you for our state managed process, and you could see kind of how we, basically to what Amy just said, how we've approached this for state managed reviews. So for 1.4, our focus is on things like access to strong training teachers to ensure they have the ability to provide all students with access to high quality instruction, meaning students, of various abilities, socioeconomic status, that sort of thing. So that's been our focus. As far as specific standards, yeah, it's really been more about the specialty area standards, pedagogical standards, literacy standards, potentially the Tennessee academic student standards if they choose to do that, though most do not. And then we have specific initiatives in Tennessee, like Andy mentioned, around literacy and special education. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I think it gives me an idea.
Okay.
But we can talk more, and that's something I think Tasha could provide insight to as well.
True, yeah.
So.
Okay, great. I'll move on here, and step 3 of the SAP reporting process is really what we talked about earlier, and that during the on-site visit, EPPs will obviously know that the state review team will tag along with the CAEP team for the on-site interviews. And so the other part of that is just being able to have the EPP respond to the specific acts of literacy interview questions. So this will be specific, even though literacy has been implemented across all initial licensure programs. Our target, because we're most interested right now, given that our focus is on early literacy, will be within early childhood, elementary, and special education programs. So again, just when we're thinking about agenda setting, ensuring that there is an opportunity to talk with faculty, clinical educators, and current candidates about literacy implementation within these particular programs. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Data and Research, Jack Powers, and he's going to kind of walk us through annual report. Do you want me to drive and you can talk? Or do you want to do it?
I can scroll.
Okay.
I'll feel weird saying slide.
Yeah.
How do I change the slide? Just right there?
Yep.
Okay, and then just... Yep. Okay, hi, David.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. So I'm going to take just a little bit of time today to walk you through the data reports that you may see through the course of your on-site review. So the big picture, in Tennessee, there are 3 different data reports, and it's possible that you could see data cited from any 3 of these. The first one is the one that's pretty ubiquitous across the whole country, and that's Title II reports. And those are federally required reports that are produced for EPPs each year. And they kind of capture things like assessment pass rates and just descriptive statistics on like the number of teachers that are credentialed or licensed every year by EPP. But today I'm going to kind of touch upon these other two right here, which are the annual reports that we here at the Department of Education produce. And then I'll also talk a little bit about the teacher preparation report card that's produced by the Tennessee State Board of Education. So each year the state produces two reports for Tennessee's EPPs. On the left there you see the Tennessee Department of Education annual reports, and on the right you'll see the State Board of Education teacher preparation report card. The important thing to understand about these reports is that although they're kind of different in terms of what they show, they are both created with the exact same shared data set that contains 3 cohorts of new teachers. So any of this teacher prep data that we're about to discuss will be captured by candidates who complete between 2014-15 and 2016-17. We're going to spend the bulk of our time just talking about the annual reports, so the ones on the left. These are internal-facing documents that we produce at the Department of Education. They're required by state policy and rule. They're detailed reports that are also designed, in addition to hold teacher prep programs accountable for their performance, also to help foster programmatic improvement and to inform the approval process. They show performance across 5 domains that we'll get into here in just a second. And on annual reports, an EPP can either meet or not meet expectations. To contrast annual reports, we also in Tennessee have the teacher preparation report card, whereas annual reports are private-facing documents that are only available to the EPPs themselves. The State Board report card is public. It is required actually by law, and it is a high-level report designed not only for EPPs, but also external stakeholders, such as prospective teacher candidates or legislators or the public at large. It shows data across 4 domains that are very similar to the 5 domains that we capture in annual reports. And on the report card, EPPs are given a score of 1 to 4. So like I mentioned, we're going to spend most of our time looking at actual the Department of Education annual reports. And like I said, these reports measure performance across 5 domains. So the first domain is recruitment and selection, and that includes things like how candidates perform on admission assessments, their GPA, and also descriptive data just about the racial and ethnic subgroup breakdown, and then also high needs endorsements. We look at 2-year retention. We look at how they perform on licensure assessments. We look at completer, partner, and employer satisfaction. And then finally, the last thing that we measure that is pretty specific to Tennessee that we'll go through is we measure their effectiveness once they actually enter the classroom. And so in Tennessee, we have 3 different metrics that do that. We have what's called TBOZ, observation scores, and level of effectiveness scores. So I'll go into a little bit of detail about those 3 because, again, this is somewhere where Tennessee might be this is something specific to Tennessee that is really important. And this is also the type of data that I think dovetails with Standard 4, if I'm not mistaken. So the Tennessee Value Added Assessment System, or TBOZ, is a statistical model that we use in Tennessee to basically measure the impact that a teacher has on student growth. And then in addition, every year, all teachers in Tennessee receive various different observation scores, and that's just the score that they receive when an administrator comes in and observes their teaching. All teachers receive an observation score. And then finally, we take those 2 different measures, TBOZ if they have it, an observation score, and then we use that along with another measure to assign every single teacher in the state an overall level of effectiveness score, and that is assigned on a 1 to 5 scale. And just real quick to go into detail about the level of effectiveness scores, like I said, every single teacher receives a level of effectiveness score in the state, but the way that score is calculated differs depending on whether that teacher teaches a subject in which we as a state deploy state tests. And so this just shows you the breakdown here. And as you can see, teachers of state-tested subjects and grades have a larger percentage of their score that is made up of that TBOZ measure that I just touched upon earlier that measures the growth that that teacher has on student learning. And so we'll take a little closer look at the TDOE annual reports. These reports are available to the EPPs on an online dashboard that is only accessible to each EPP. And so I've taken some screenshots just to kind of give you an idea of what the annual reports look like. So this is the landing page. If you'll notice, the annual reports are actually split into two parts. The first part is the performance report, and the second part is the insights tool. The performance report is the one that's tied to accountability, and the insights tool is the one that's tied to continuous improvement. And like I mentioned, the purpose of the performance report is to provide EPPs, the state, and review teams with data that is used to inform the program approval process and cycle that Annie mentioned earlier. And specifically, the performance report allows us to go in and kind of measure EPP performance between the 7-year comprehensive review cycle. EPPs in Tennessee that fall below expectations for 2 consecutive years on the performance report are required to undergo what's called an interim review. And so what you'll see here in these screenshots that I'm about to show you are key metrics that we have identified for accountability purposes, and we use specific thresholds to identify whether an EPP has met expectations across those metrics. So this is the second level of a performance report. If you see the EPP is assigned overall performance, and you can see in this case the EPP has met expectations. In order to meet expectations on the performance report, an EPP must meet expectations on domain 5, which we will talk about here in a moment, or they have to meet expectations on 3 of the 4 that we measure. So you can see there the same domains that I touched upon earlier: recruitment and selection, employment and retention, candidate assessment, satisfaction, and then effectiveness and impact. So this is a detailed view of domain 1, candidate recruitment and selection. And you can see over to the right with the check marks and X's are the different metrics that we measure. And each metric, whether it be the admissions assessment or undergraduate GPA, comes with a threshold. And so you can see down there at the bottom in this screenshot, I chose that 4th metric right there that says underrepresentation for racial and ethnic subgroups. The expectation that we have is that at least 22% of an incoming cohort at any given EPP falls within an underrepresented racial or ethnic subgroup, and then it gets cut off there, but it's supposed to say, or they show growth, so that they have grown year over year in the number of candidates that they, or the percent of candidates that make up their cohort that are from an underrepresented racial or ethnic subgroup. And so this is domain 5, which again is completer effectiveness and impact. So that's the level of effectiveness scores, the TBOZ, and the observation rating that I just went over earlier. And again, this is the one that dovetails with standard 4 in CAEP. And just like the first one that I showed you, there are expectations for this as well. I selected TBOZ, and in this case, the expectation that we have is that the percentage of candidates receiving its TBOZ score of 3 out of 5 meets or exceeds the state average. And as you can see in this example, the CPP met expectations there. So the second part of annual reports is the insights tool. And again, this is the part that's not tied to accountability, but is tied to continuous improvement. The insights tool has more detailed information across the same 5 domains. And the goals are to let the EPP investigate and interact with multiple metrics across various domains and cohort years, and to hopefully provide them with actionable data that they can use to make programmatic improvement. So I'll walk you through just a couple screenshots of the insights tool. So right here, what we have is a 3-year average, so how teachers performed from 2014 to 2017 on that domain 5 that we just talked about, completer effectiveness and impact. And what I did is I just chose the distribution of their TBOZ ratings. So you can see how an EPP can go in and see how the percentage of their candidates who score each specific TBOZ rating, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, changes, as well as the overall LOE score and their observation ratings. And the Insights tool allows us to drill down further than that. So what this shows is using that same level of detail that I showed before, looking at completer effectiveness and impact, but drilling down to the endorsement area. So here, what we're looking at is the percentage of completers that have received each level of TBOZ score by endorsement. And if you'll notice, for this EPP, they can look and see across their candidates who receive biology endorsements, chemistry, elementary ed, English, history, math, and middle grades, they can actually go look and see the percentage of their completers that score a TBOZ score of 3 or higher. And again, this allows EPPs to kind of identify areas to improve and also areas of strength in order to foster programmatic improvement. The last thing that's important to know about annual reports is that these metrics were developed in consultation with a working group that we have here at the department called the Educator Preparation Working Group, and it's comprised of various...
Almost 20 people, right?
That's right, almost 20 EPP faculty and staff and other stakeholders. So they were the group, that was the group that determined the metrics that we actually measure, those 5 domains, and then we here at the department developed the actual thresholds, so like the 22% or growth, and then the overall expectations. All right. Do you have any questions? We're going to unmute you.
In fact, we saw some of this within Standard 4 with Annie and the offsite review, and it was very impressive. So.
Great. All right. I'm going to hand it back to Annie to go over a few other Tennessee-specific considerations.
Yeah. And again, David, when we're on site, if you find it to be helpful, if Lipscomb provided some evidence within their self-study or their addendum, and you would like one of the state facilitators to pull up Lipscomb's annual reports or performance reports, we'll have the ability to do that. So if you want to see anything in greater detail, we can certainly accommodate that.
Okay.
A few other things, other Tennessee specific considerations related to the review. Over the last several years, there's also been a very big push and focus on partnerships, EPP and LEA partnerships. This is rooted in policy, and so particularly in Standard 2, you'll probably see a lot of reference to Lipscomb's primary partnerships. What this means is that, or what they require is that there's an established and explicit process for identifying and responding LEA identified areas of need, that there is a collaborative development of candidate selection criteria and a collaborative design and implementation of high-quality needs-based clinical experiences. There's also, so every EPP is required to have at least one primary partner. For all other districts in which the provider places candidates for clinical practice, they're required to have a state-recognized partnership as well. And those are not quite as intensive as a primary partnership, but still require established roles and responsibilities of EPP faculty and LEA staff, including clinical mentors and supervisors, and clearly establish expectations regarding the delivery of candidate support and evaluation. Jack mentioned earlier that the observation scores are factored into annual report data. What you might also see is reference to the team rubric. So Tennessee doesn't require a team, but most districts, I would say, use the team evaluation rubric for observations.
Does Tennessee have rules related to the requirements to be a mentor teacher to students?
Yeah, so off the top of my head, they must be endorsed in a similar area. They must be a level 4 or 5 on overall level of effectiveness, which Jack talked a little bit about a moment ago. And I believe it's now 3 years of experience they must have as well.
Are there?
Now,
Are there?
we don't have many other things have is like a required training.
Okay, so the EPP would be responsible for training, and however, if they use the teams that Annie just pointed out, are they all trained system-wide on the teams assessment?
Not quite. So if you're serving as a clinical mentor, you're not necessarily endorsed or licensed as an administrator or teacher evaluator. And so in most cases, in the vast majority of cases, I would say no, the clinical mentors would not have gone through the formal team training. EPPs and districts should work together to develop training for clinical mentors. That's actually a huge part of the IES grant work that we've been doing over the last few years. And I'd say the quality of those trainings that exist is all over the place.
And this has been an area of focus for Lipscomb in particular. We just know them pretty well since they're local, but their primary partner is with Metro Nashville Public Schools, and we've sat in a few partnership meetings in which clinical mentor training is at the forefront. So they should have evidence of that.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, it was good questions. There are 3 types of clinical practice in Tennessee. We mentioned a little bit earlier. Of course, there's student teaching. That's a planned semester of at least 15 weeks, including full-day teaching and observation activities under the guidance of cooperating teacher. An internship is a full school year of clinical practice completed under the guidance of a mentor teacher. And under an internship, candidates are required to spend at least 100 school days engaged in direct teaching experiences. That's, I believe, 100 consecutive school days. Is that right? Okay.
Yeah, usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the job embedded pathway, which is maybe a little bit unique or different comparatively, is a year-long clinical practice completed by the candidates who actually possess a bachelor's degree, and they serve as a full-time teacher of record while enrolled in and receiving training through an approved EPP.
I was just thinking that this is for Lipscomb, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have a pretty unique relationship with TFA. Do we need to?
I don't know about that right now. Have you all, I mean, I would assume they spoke to their partnership with Teach for America?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we've talked at some length about EPP literacy standards. Just additional context, these were approved in 2017. They're located in the literacy and specialty area standards for ed prep policy. They're very tightly aligned with the Tennessee ELA student standards. And then for instructional leader, you'll see alignment to the TILS or the Tennessee Instructional Leadership Standards. So again, a really big push, and you'll likely see evidence of the implementation of these standards within and across programs. So I think that concludes the information we had for you today regarding all things to know about regarding Tennessee and this review. What other questions do you have for us regarding the status in which the review is in now, or any additional questions related to the on-site visit?
I've asked them all along the way, and I appreciate that. So I really don't have any at this point. I think everything that I did have questions about, you've all addressed through those. Yeah,
that's great. If anything comes up between now and March, you can certainly reach out, contact us here at the department. Tasha will continue to be a great resource for you as well. As far as this recorded webinar, it takes about 24 hours for the recording to download. And what we can do is upload it to a workable URL so that there are other members of the team that have specific questions related, say, to Standard 2 with partnerships or Standard 4 with data. We would encourage them to listen and watch this webinar, and hopefully that will support them in making decisions at this part of the iterative review.
Okay, that sounds great.
All right, well, thank you so much, David, and you know where to find us if you have any questions.
Yes, ma'am. I'll probably be in touch shortly.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.